Hello everybody, my name is ideologies, and today we're going to be continuing Project Nuclear Downfall of the Slow Rebuild of the World. Let's go. Okay, so in this... this is a thing that took place after nuclear war that's inspired by Fallout. And now the world is nuclear exploded into oblivion. But that will change when the first Indians would come out of their bunkers in Kolkata, as more Indians come out of their bunkers in Mumbai. But they unfortunately suffer from radiation sickness, because the world is basically just one big radioactive hell. Not to mention all the radioactive monsters that are everywhere, like deathclaws, rad scorpions, and super mutants. Next up, we're going to head to Iraq, as more specifically in Mesopotamia, where the Mesopotamian Republic is established. As a republic between the Tigris and Euphrates River. That is now irradiated. Now we're going to head over to Germany, where the Bavarian Soviet Republic would get established as one of the as the first of many new German states. Prussia would also get established as a democratic republic in the remnants of Kaliningrad. The Federal Republic of Germany would be established in the remains of Berlin. And Württemberg gets independence, along with Baden, as the Rhineland would also exist as the Confederation of the Rhine. These German states would be contesting for power as the Federal Republic of Germany unites with the Prussian Republic. Now we're going to head on over to the United States, where a Chinese submarine named Shui Hongdi would run aground in San Francisco. Yeah. So, there was a civil war between the faults, between two factions, the pre-war United States and the Enclave. The Enclave won, and the Enclave is basically from the Enclave from Fallout. It is basically fascist America that believes in American supremacy and wants to get rid of all the ghouls, super mutants, and any impurity in the Wasteland. So the Enclave would come out of their bunkers in Navarro and Washington, D.C. They would also come out of their bunkers in other places, like Chicago. Yeah. The next people to come out of their bunkers will be the Wasteland Moscow Red Army, which will be established within the remains of Moscow as a communist nation. That's basically the Soviet Union. Ukrainians would emerge from their bunker, but they would find some problems with their agriculture, as most of their farmland is just irradiated worse than Chernobyl. If you didn't know, Chernobyl is basically it was a nuclear power plant until things went horribly wrong there, and it's basically Fallout from real life in Chernobyl. But let's head from Chernobyl to Rome, where the Roman Empire will be reestablished. They would come in Rome, and their official language would be Latin. More Italian states would gain independence, like Piedmont, Sardinia, Naples, Sicily, and Venice. Sardinia would take Genoa and more of Italy. Austrians would come out of their bunkers and reclaim their land, hoping that no one would invade them. But unfortunately, the Bavarian Soviet Republic would start an invasion of Austria. Yeah. The Federal Republic of Germany and the Bavarian Soviet Republic would continue to move in the wastelands of Germany. The Rhineland would unite with Baden-Württemberg and would declare war on the Bavarian Soviet Republic. The Bavarian Soviet Republic would win this war and become the Socialist People's Republic of Germany. The Federal Republic of Germany would push into Poland, and they would declare war on the Socialist Germans that are being aided by the Soviets. And then there would be a German civil... Oh, wait. Let's continue the German Civil War. And Austria would and the Soviet Germans would fall into German hands. But then another German civil war breaks out, with people who want the Kaiser back to rebel in Berlin and Prussia. Austria would get independent as the Kingdom of Austria. And they would take over Slovenia. The Ukrainians would continue to connect with their Crimea, but the Soviets would not let that slide so easily, and they would occupy Donetsk. More people would rise up in the Enclave. But I would establish a government based on the pre-war United States of America, as the Institute would be formed right next to me. The Enclave would see that there is a pre-war United States that's back. I would basically push to liberate Canada. I establish a free Canadian state. I would continue to push into the place and into the Commonwealth, and I would eventually come into conflict with the Enclave launching a full-on offensive into my place. But I am clever, and I would hatch an idea. Because I know the Enclave is against schools, and I'm a ghoul, I would just get a dead ghoul and dress him in my clothes to fake my death as Syracuse gets captured. The Enclave would also take over Canada, as I would lose the war. Now the Brotherhood of Steel would be established in the Midwest and Cleveland. They would also be established in Appalachia and the Mojave. A person named Caesar would establish a legion in Flagstaff. They would be called Caesar's Legion. And it would basically be the Slaver Society. This map looks ugly. The Southeastern Enclave would create a thing, as the Brotherhood of Steel would also do the thing. Raiders in Pittsburgh would establish a slave ironworks called the Pit. As the Enclave continues to push into the Midwest. Hi everyone! My face cam just accidentally turned on. Now let's head on over to California, where a state of Shady Sands will be created by Ardesh and Tandy. Now we're going to check on the Indians. India is doing very well. Vaults opening in New Delhi and Tamil. And even Pakistanis would become existent, as more Indian vaults would open in Gujarat. They would eventually forget their conflicts with Pakistan and become friends. Even giving Pakistan Kashmir. Nepal and Bhutan would also exist. I'm going to create Kurdistan now. Now Kurdistan exists, and a person called the Pharaoh would establish a state in Egypt and the Levant. A person named Ghengis would establish a Mongolian empire in Mongolia called Genghis' Khanate. This would essentially be like Caesar's Legion. Speaking of the Legion, let's see how they're doing. The Legion is expanding quickly, as Shady Sands would become the new California Republic. And the Brotherhood of Steel would give them some of the NCR land. Yeah. The Enclave would continue to open bunkers in Texas. Yeah. As the German Civil War rages on and a new state gets established. That's basically the Wasteland's version of Nazi Germany. The Greater Wasteland Reich. Led by a clone of Adolf Hitler. The Novus Romanum would also continue expanding. And they would even take over the papal Tuscan Sardinia, as they would also take over Naples. A new socialist republic of Germany would be established in Bavaria, in southern Germany, as Austria would liberate their place. As the Wasteland Greater Reich would take Bavaria, Austria, the rest of the German Soviets over, and would destroy the German Empire and create basically the new Nazi Reich in the Wasteland. As they would take over Austria. Yeah. The Wasteland Moscow Red Army would declare war on Ukraine and push into Crimea, and they would win the war. Now, Genghis' Khanate would continue to expand rapidly. Even pushing into East Turkestan and the Ma. Caesar's legion would declare war on the Brotherhood of Steel and would take over Las Vegas. Or, that's now called New Vegas. The Enclave would continue to take over Reno. This does not look great, as the Texas chapter of the Enclave would expand into Mexico and Canada. The new Roman Empire would take over Sicily and then land on Tunisia, as a new Islamic thing is rising up in the Arabian Peninsula. But not after the Pharaoh takes over the entirety of the Levant and pushes eastward. And it is Caliphate, and it would be established in Mecca. The Wastelands are beginning to become worse, as Russia would continue to expand in the Far East, which is a nuclear winter. Japan would establish new shogunate, led under Tokogawa, that's also isolationist, just like historically. Now let's head on over to Britain, where some people who have read George Orwell's 1984 would establish a state based off of it, called Ingsoc. This is basically just Oceania from George Orwell's 1984. Ireland would also be established, as Ingsoc would comply with the Germans, who have expanding into the Belgium and the Netherlands. Because both Ingsoc and the Wasteland Greater Reich are authoritarian dictatorships. Ingsoc might be fascist, but I don't know. We don't really know the ideology of Oceania, just that they're called Ingsoc. The Wasteland Greater Reich would expand into the Wasteland, as the Master creates a Super Mutant race, but this time it's in Colorado and Utah, instead of the Mariposa military base. The Enclave would see this and they would hate it, so they would declare war on them. And yeah. The Brotherhood of Steel would establish some places in Washington and this place, as Alberta exists. Now it's time for the fall of the Pharaoh's empire, with the Roman invasion of Egypt. And thus the Pharaoh has fallen to Rome. The Romans would expand greatly into Spain, because they want to establish a Mare Nostrum, just like historically. They would also attack into the last remaining thing, which is Venice. And Venice gets taken over. The Roman Empire is expanding very quickly into Spain and Gaul. And they would split Switzerland with the Wasteland Greater Reich, as they would continue to invade into Poland. Yeah. And in Poland, they would establish a puppet state. Yeah. Ingsoc would keep expanding into the United Kingdom, as the Soviets also expand into the Baltics and Belarus. They would also liberate St. Petersburg, and it will get their name changed again to Leningrad. Volgograd would also get their name changed to Stalingrad, as a Russian national reclamation government that wants revenge would exist in Omsk. These are basically ultra-nationalist Russians that want a great trial against the people who have conquered, who have nuked them into oblivion. In Taiwan, a new democratic state would be established called the National Chinese Government, which would take over some parts of China, as Japan would be fully united under the Shogunate, and they would attack into Korea. But in Manchuria, a new state would be established called the People's Army. This is essentially just a communist version of the National Chinese State. The National Chinese State would take Hong Kong and Macau, as they would expand. Let's check in on India and Pakistan to see how they're doing. Yeah, they're doing well, and there's also a Mughal Empire in Bangladesh. The new Romans would continue to take over Mediterranean, as they would also push deeper into Hispania and Lusitania. These Romans are going to fall very hard. As Ingsoc would keep pushing into the wastelands of Great Britain. And they would take over Iceland and would land in South Africa to spread their ideology. The Romans would also start colonizing. They would start by colonizing Newfoundland. The Greater Wasteland Reich would also start colonialism, as they would colonize Liberia and and Qatar. Mesopotamia would take over Kurdistan. As they would take Sarajevo and Zagreb. And the ancient Romans would continue to conquer the Mediterranean. Let's head on over to the Enclave to see how they're doing. They've also decided to start colonizing in places. Eventually, the Enclave would come into interaction with Ingsoc. I never thought I would have to say the Enclave and Ingsoc in the same sentence. What is happening in this world? Anyway, they would continue to colonize as Ireland would get invaded by Ingsoc. And they would land in Normandy. And would take Paris. As the Wasteland Greater Reich would push into Burgundy. And they would not establish the Order State of Burgundy. They would also push into Denmark. As you can see, most of the wasteland is occupied by totalitarian regimes. The Institute would also start colonizing by starting in the Caribbean. Also, New California would start colonizing with the NCR Navy. They would colonize Angola and Hawaii. The Brotherhood of Steel would also colonize Somaliland and some more parts of Somalia. They would also colonize Yemen and Oman. The Wasteland Greater Reich would receive Namibia from the Enclave. And the Oceania would continue their colony. And Australians would emerge from their bunkers. And reclaim their land. Next up, we're going to see an American Civil War, the fall of Rome, and the rise of a caliphate. Bye!